I have two final lessons that'll dovetail with the Gospel of John class that we've had on Lord's Day mornings this last quarter. And one of those sermons I'll preach this morning, one next Lord's Day morning. This morning, I want to explore with you Jesus' post-resurrection comfort that he extends to some apostles who had sorely disappointed him. Prior to him leaving them, he had promised that they would all forsake him. And this has roots in an Old Testament prophecy in Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 7. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. Even the best of the disciples, including the three selected by Jesus to be intimate with him in his final hours and to pray with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, totally failed to render the service expected of them. He would go back to them again and again. What, could you not watch with me 1 hour and pray? And Luke says they were sleeping for sorrow. And then when the enemy appeared, the moment of truth, soldiers coming to arrest him, these three, along with the other 8, minus Judas, who had already forsaken him, all ran away panic-stricken. And finally, the most outspoken of them not only forsook his master, but denied him, cursing and swearing, "I do not know him." Hard to imagine, in light of the fact that he had predicted it just hours earlier. But all the disciples forsook him and fled, every single one of his close intimates, the men whom he had commissioned to be his spokespersons in this world, his ambassadors, his apostles. How should they have acted? Heroically, courageously. And why did they act as they did? What were the causes of their breakdown? Jesus forbade them from offering any armed resistance, and yet, ironically, they were willing to offer that. In Luke 22 and verse 38, after Jesus has told them to take a money bag, unlike when he had told them to take none in a limited commission, take a knapsack. Let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one, Luke 22:36. And then verse 38, they put up, "Lord, here are 2 swords." They completely missed the metaphorical emphasis of taking swords in the sense of, or buying a sword in the sense of bracing yourself for what's coming. He was not talking about going out and finding a literal sword or 2 of them to offer armed resistance. And when the moment came, verse 49 of the same opening, Luke 22 says, when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. According to Matthew's account, in Matthew 26, beginning with verse 52, Jesus said to him, after Peter had drawn the sword and struck Malchus's ear, Put your sword back into his place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? He could meet human force by superior heavenly power if he so chose. But to do so would defeat his own purpose for coming into the world. He was to conquer not by physical force, but by love and truth and godly patience, by drinking the cup the Father placed into his hands. The duty of the apostles was to brace themselves for battle, not to expose themselves to danger. Their duty was to take care of their lives for future usefulness, but not to fight a physical battle, not to defend him with a physical sword. They were willing to do that, and yet they still run away like cowards. Their fault was not in being willing to fight for or die for their Lord. It was a lack of faith. He had already told them hours before, believe in God, believe also in me. John 14 and verse 1. And yet, somehow, some way, they could not connect the dots. They could not bring themselves to believe that all would end well, both for them and their master, if they did not take matters into their own hands. So, lacking faith, they neither calmly followed nor calmly left the scene. Those who were willing to take up the sword and defend Jesus now forsook him and fled. They fled in unbelief and despair. And again, it was not like they had not been warned. All of them had plenty of advance notice. In Matthew 26:31, Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Again, citing the passage in Zechariah 13:7. Why? Why did this happen? How could it have happened? Could it happen to you? It happened because they failed to pray. Pray, you may not enter into temptation. And yet, when Jesus took 3 of them to pray, they fell asleep. And the others evidently didn't take the warning seriously enough. They failed to pray. They failed to realize what was coming. They failed to realize the full force of what was coming. When Satan unleashed his attack, they had no idea that they were even on the field of battle. It completely blindsided them. Has that ever happened to you? It certainly has happened to me. Around the corner of life, Satan is lurking when you least expect it, totally unprepared, in way over your head. They failed to accept the plan of God. Jesus had already told them repeatedly that he was going to Jerusalem to die. They had other ideas. When he first mentions it plainly in Mark 8:31 and following, Peter says, Lord, this will never happen to you. Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan, for you're not minding the things of God, but the things of man. The 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, after all was said and done, told their stranger, after Jesus had died on a cross and there were mysteries swirling about an empty tomb, they said, we had hoped that it was he who was to redeem Israel. Luke 24:11. When Jesus died, their hope died with him. How can anyone act heroically under such misconceptions? They failed to accept the plan of God. They failed to properly assess their own weaknesses. They credited themselves with an amount of fidelity and valor which existed in their own imagination. Even Peter had said, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." Matthew 26:35. And when danger actually appeared a few hours later, all of these stout-hearted disciples forsook Jesus and fled like cowards. They had a higher estimate of their own faith than they should have. Therefore, let him who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12. That's the principle they should have been fixated on. They failed to consider their inexperience. They were novices, not battle-hardened veterans. Bravery is earned by experience on the battlefield. Jesus is somewhat lenient with them because he knows them better than they know themselves. And then when it came to Peter, the loudmouth among them, the one who says, "Even if they all forsake you, I will never do that." When Jesus zeroes in on Peter in Luke's account, he says, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Jesus regards this pending crisis as a sifting time. And Satan has, behind the scenes, demanded to sift you like wheat. In a previous crisis, when the other disciples had walked away, John 6:66, many of the disciples no longer walked with him. So that verse 67 says, Jesus turned to the 12 and asked them personally, "Will you also go away?" And you know who stood up that time? Everyone's walking away. You could see the air going out of the balloon, the deflating circumstances. And yet Peter stands up and says, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God." John 6:68 and 69. He stood up courageously. The difference is that in that crisis, Jesus himself was still with them. In the crisis in which all the disciples will flee, they are left as sheep without a shepherd, as the prophecy has said. In losing him, they lose not only their friend and master, but their faith. Jesus' hope is, even if they temporarily should fall, that their faith would not fail. Even in the case of Peter, "I have prayed that your faith may not fail." And when you have turned again, when you have repented of this, strengthen your brothers. I need you in this position. Peter doesn't accept all of that. "Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Don't you know that?" And Jesus says, "I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you even know me." Many people are able to boldly proclaim Christ from the pulpit. Many people are able to boldly proclaim Christ from the front pew of a church building. Many people are able to boldly proclaim Christ in a Bible class. Are you able to boldly proclaim Christ in the workroom tomorrow? That's a different story. In mixed company, standing where Christ's servants are supposed to speak the truth, they bravely draw their swords, but mixing in society on equal and sometimes unequal terms, they too often say, in effect, I do not know the man. At least we can say of Peter that he did not fall as Judas fell, utterly and irrevocably. If Jesus prayed for Peter, it should give you some hope that he prays for you as well. Hebrews 7:25 says, consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always or ever lives to make intercession for them. Just as Jesus prayed for Peter, he prays for his people today. I know that there will be times when they disappoint me, but I pray that their faith may not fail. And when they turn again, that they'll be able to serve me again with fresh vigor and maybe even stronger for the whole experience. The fall exposed Peter's weakness, but the Lord looks beyond that time to a time afterward when you have turned again. Strengthen your brothers. There will be a happy ending. The Lord used Peter's weakness to make him even stronger. Peter and John, they do so much together, and I could say a whole lot about that in the Gospel of John. They're both evidently following Jesus from chapter 1, and in chapter 21, they're walking together, Jesus with Peter, with John tagging along just behind. Peter motions to John at the Last Supper, find out, who it is, who will betray him, and John accommodates him. According to Luke's account, they both go to prepare the Passover supper together. It's Peter and John who are commissioned to do that. Many times it's Peter, James, and John who tag along together. They're at the Garden of Gethsemane. They're at the Mount of Transfiguration. James is martyred for the cause of Christ, Acts chapter 12, but you see Peter and John together even in the book of Acts. They go to the temple to pray together in Acts 3. It's Peter and John. And in Acts 20 or John 21, you have them differentiating. What about him, Lord? What about if I'm going to die a violent death, what about him? You mind your own business, essentially, is what Jesus tells him. You have deep friendship. They both run together to the tomb. John 20, Peter and John. John outruns him and peers in from a distance, and then Peter just barges in. Peter and John, Peter and John. Though all the disciples, without exception, forsook Jesus, two of them recover sufficient courage to follow their master from a distance to see what would become of him. And in the synoptics, you only see Peter in this role. But these two disciples have a long-standing friendship. They were partners in a fishing business, both part of the inner circle. Their personalities seem to have complemented one another. Peter, outgoing and outspoken, John, beloved and reflective. And now they just could not bring themselves to sit and do nothing while their Lord was being tried. And there was a certain spirit of daring at work. Besides, they both genuinely loved Jesus. So in the Gospel of John, chapter 18, beginning with verse 15, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. You have Jesus and the other disciple, usually thought to be John, I think is John, goes to great length, is at great pains not to mention himself by name. But the ambiguity here is revealing in more ways than one. I could talk a lot about that. And he enters right through the gate with Jesus. Everyone there knows he's a disciple. He's known to the high priestly family. Verse 16, but Peter stood outside at the door. Now there's a role reversal. John is the one that barges in, and Peter's waiting outside. So the other disciple who was known to the high priest went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, "You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you?" She already knew the first one was. And there Peter wilts. I am not. The servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest questioned Jesus, and as all of that was going on, verse 25, Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You also are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, he was in hostile territory here. He had just cut off this relative's ear, asked him, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter again denied it, and at once the rooster crowed. So these two disciples had a friendship. According to Matthew's account, Peter began to curse and to swear, "I do not know the man." And Luke's account says at that precise moment, after denial number 3, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And if looks could kill, Peter felt about that big and went out and wept bitterly. But it's not like he hadn't been warned. By disregarding or at least underestimating the warning, he willfully rushed right into the tempter's arms. It's a great lesson for every single person in this room. Do not overestimate your own strength and underestimate Satan. If you do, you're in way over your head. Well, there's such a good footnote to all of this. Strike the shepherd, the sheep are scattered. On that resurrection Sunday, when Jesus appears inside a locked room where the apostles are cowering in fear of the enemy, do you remember his first word? We talked about it in class this morning. And it's his first word both in Luke's account and in John's account of the same incident. Luke captures the essence of the phrase, "Peace be to you." In John's account, it's "Peace be with you." A week later, when Thomas is present with the apostles, Jesus appears again and again. He says, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." I want to impress upon your minds this thing, that this is the first word Jesus uses that's recorded in these gospel accounts, the resurrection accounts. The first word that he uses to these apostles after they have profoundly disappointed him. This is the first time they've reunited after the arrest, the betrayal, the crucifixion, the resurrection. He appears to them. They the last time he has seen these 12 men, they've run away. At the reunion, the first word he uses is peace. And Rene in the Greek, corresponding Hebrew would be shalom, which is a term of congratulations because of a covenant relationship that you have with God and all the blessings that attend to that. In the epistles, you often read grace and peace from God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ at the very beginning of the epistle. Grace is what God did for us undeservedly on our part. We did not merit it in any way. Peace is what results from that. A relationship with God, a covenant relationship with God. And that's the term embodied in what Jesus tells them the very first time that he sees them as a group, after they have profoundly and unequivocally disappointed him by running away like cowards. And what that says to me is that Jesus, in essence, is restoring them to favor and telling them, embodied in that one word, you have really blown it. But I know it's going to be okay, because next time you're going to do it heroically. And you are still my apostles. And there's so much work you have to do. You talk about building up their confidence. When you have let your Lord down, and yet you want so much to come back and to serve him afresh, remember that word. And then he has this conversation with Peter, Acts or John 20:21, by the seashore of Galilee. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? He said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And he says in John 21:18, truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself, walk wherever you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands. Another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. Now, this is in John's account, and I want to go back a few pages in John to chapter 13. Chapter 13, 36 through 38, John's account. Read it with me. John 13, 36 through 38. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. In both of these texts, the operative term is not agape versus phileo, different kinds of love. The operative term is follow. I'll follow you wherever you go. Will you? And then at a charcoal fire, Peter denies him 3 times. And in John 21, there's another charcoal fire, breakfast at the beach. And Jesus takes Peter and they have this discussion. And that threefold denial is answered by a threefold affirmation. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And after each one, there's a challenge: feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. I need you in a shepherd's role. He had already positioned him to be in a fisherman's role. Follow me, same word, and I will make you fishers of men. By hook or by crook, Peter was in a leader's role, shepherd's role, a fisherman's role. But that threefold denial is answered by a threefold affirmation. And after each one where Peter can't quite bring himself to use agapao, the highest word for love, Jesus is essentially restoring him to full favor and saying, I need you. You profoundly let me down. Do you really love me? I need you to tend my sheep. I need you to feed my people. Lord, I'll follow you wherever you go. Are you sure about that? And here in the threefold affirmation that follows the threefold denial, Jesus answers all of it by saying, follow me. Next time, do it. Well, what about this one? What about John over here? You don't worry about John. You follow me. And Peter did. When his moment of truth came, fires of Rome burned the city down in AD 64, and 2 apostles were slain in the aftermath of that, and many Christians. According to one Roman account, there were Christians who were burned to light up Nero's gardens. Paul had his head severed from his body, and Peter was crucified. And according to the early Christian accounts, upside down because he felt himself unworthy to be crucified right side up as his Lord had been. And there you have it. You may profoundly disappoint your Lord at some point in your life, maybe at many points in your life. But you stay with this. And you realize that he's praying for you. And you realize that he has work for you to do. And the culmination of your life, you make it victorious. And he'll help you every step of the way. He does not want you to fail. He wants you to succeed, as he did Peter. And you do it. That's the lesson for today. If you're subject to the invitation call of Christ, realize that there's a great day coming. And when all is said and done, you follow him. You can begin today by being baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of every sin you've ever committed. Confess Christ before this comfortable audience and then go out and confess him to anyone and everyone, even in a hostile world. But you follow him at all costs. Let's stand and sing Song of Invitation.